Well, good morning, everyone. What I'm going to do is, we have a published schedule or agenda. So this presentation on the stormwater design water quality requirements isn't really scheduled to start for about another 12 minutes or so. So I'm going to go back and kind of expand upon some of the stuff that Brian has talked about. Talk a little bit, chapter 3 maybe. But there is still, every once in a while, someone will get online, and there's still a little bit of feedback. So I'm asking everyone to please be mindful of your mics. Be sure you mute the mic so we don't get the feedback. We can't. This isn't an interactive presentation. We're just talking on this end. So, but we can hear when someone doesn't have their mic muted. So good morning. My name is Joe Myers. I am the current city engineer for the city of Houston, Houston Public Works. This is the office that is responsible for the updates to the manual every year. Brian's pretty much already covered this topic and the review cycles, but it's worth repeating. And so I want to reiterate what the IDM is all about before we get into the presentation. So the IDM is really for consistency here at the City of Houston, the preparation of documents. We have multiple service lines that prepare documents, capital projects probably being the biggest with their workload. But we also have Houston Water, transportation drainage operations. And so the consistency of the documents is pretty much, is really important, that we remain consistent in our work. And so that's really the primary focus. So you heard Brian talk about the deliverables, you heard him talk about electronic files and a CAD file, because we are slowly but surely that's being introduced into our deliverable requirement here at the city. And eventually that deliverable requirement will probably branch into the development community as well. So those of you that do work for the city should see this crop up in contracts. Those of you that do work for private development and do work with the Office of the Engineer for review, we'll start seeing this as a requirement in some time in the future. Right now it's not a development requirement, but it is creeping into the design contracts. So just keep that in mind, that we're just trying to bring consistency to it. There is a comment within the manual that speaks to us not holding development to a graphic standard. That's not necessarily true. What we are doing is that I do believe graphics matter, and it definitely matters when you're doing the design contract for the city of Houston. But when you're doing work for a developer and it's really just a record drawing, and we may or may not get it in an electronic format, what I don't want is our reviewers holding up somebody's project for a graphical mistake or graphical omission. And so that's what that is all about. So we're trying to, we provide a service. Folks come to this office for permitting. We are trying to be consistent. We're trying to be efficient. We're trying to be quick as fast as we can. And so I just want to be clear about that. And so even though we do have a standard review cycle, that doesn't mean that we do accept suggestions continuously. And now with this group that Brian is solidifying, we're getting better at it. We're getting better at collecting comments. We're getting better at responding to comments. We're getting better at documenting the comments. And so feel free at any time after this presentation, even though we do have a standard review cycle, you don't have to wait for the review cycle to make a comment. And that's going to come up too in this presentation. So we did have a significant participation in this cycle. Pretty good cross section of the community. We reached out to, probably for the first time, to a lot of government agencies, reached across the aisle to contractors and various other organizations for the purpose that everybody uses this manual, or they should, and they should be consistent. So I just want to make sure that it's understood that even though we did do a fairly good cross section of the community, we didn't hit everybody. you are not everybody, but you are a much larger cross section. So you get to hear this, spread the word about the presentation. This new group will collect information. We documented the changes this time. They will collect suggestions moving forward. So I think this is basically a brand new day, brand new process that we're following, and so we're looking forward to it. I'm hoping the community gets a lot out of it as well, and it turns out to be a much better product. So I want to thank Brian again for presenting chapter 3. It is a very important chapter in our manual, especially for the in-house projects, because we are moving toward capturing things electronically. We'll have electronic record. You can use electronic record in maintenance and making edits and in the future. Right now with the static plan sets and just images, it's not near as easy. And as Jamie will follow this presentation with standards and specifications, you'll see there too that we're trying to get away from this cut and paste and plastering over a 22 by 34 a standard. Why don't we just use something better? So Jamie's presentation again will be an effort to standardize. Now I do want to do a disclaimer. I do have like 6 minutes to go. I don't know if I can fill 6 minutes, but I do want to say that anything I say cannot be held against me at any future date. The manual is very much a dynamic document. If we say something, do something that isn't quite right, if we give the impression of one way and it's supposed to be another, please let us know. We're in a mode of providing updates now. We're in a mode of correcting things that have happened. Chapter 9, there was some history in Chapter 9, obviously. Just went through a change last year, and there's various things there's been a lot of questions. I'm going to try to clear those up over the next hour or so. And my presentation will be about an hour. And then we'll allow about 30 minutes. This is pretty much the meat of the most recent review that we did. So hopefully it will spur some questions and allow for some time for questions. I do only have until 11:30. I won't be here for the last 30 minutes of the presentation, but I will be here till 11:30. So I think I've probably pretty much stalled for time. Anybody that comes in over the next 5 minutes, I was expecting to start at 10. We'll just basically see it start a little bit early. So again, my section is talking about the stormwater design and water quality requirements that we perform this review cycle. This is a combining of Chapter 9 and Chapter 13. So in our manual, Chapter 9 is a combination of them. Chapter 13 will be put in reserve so that we can possibly do something else with it at some later date, cover some other topic. And so you just heard Chapter 3. Brian told you some of the other things we did. Chapter 16 did get the wireless facilities updated because we're knee deep or neck deep or drowning in telecommunication projects right now. The city decided to streamline this process because of the close nature of these two topics, of course. Rather than having put between two different chapters, just put it all in one chapter. So if you're doing stormwater management, more than likely in the future, you're probably going to be doing on virtually everything, some sort of stormwater quality. So why not just combine them? Why not put them into one chapter for everyone to follow? Stormwater quality features will probably be used more and more in the future as we move into LID, green infrastructure, for detention as well. So it's a good combining of topics. But as I go through this, what we're not hitting on formally anyway within any one of these chapters are other parts of the other parts of the IDM, if you would. So variances is something that comes up a lot, even though we did make a significant amount of effort. We put a lot of effort into this to capture to capture as many changes or as many issues as we possibly could. We're not going to capture everything. So the variance process, so one thing we did was it eliminated, throughout the old through the previous chapter 9 and 13, you constantly hear, or not constantly hear, you read that if you cannot do something, then you need to file a variance with the city engineer. And I've spent the last 15 months pretty much hitting home this need for a variance if you cannot follow the IDM. It wasn't something that was necessarily followed consistently in the past. So the variance process is there for a reason. And so if you cannot follow the manual, then you need to submit for a variance. And so on our website, you can go to the city engineer's site. There are 2 variances, one for public and one for private. You need to fill that out. You need to submit it to your reviewer, because that's who's going to review it first before it gets to the city engineer, not directly to me. But that still exists. So if we didn't cover something, or if it's still not quite right, industry would like to do it some other way, we are very much open to a discussion on it and a way to capture the change. So be sure to go to our website. It's not a perfect system, so please help us. Your comments are important. Your insights, your experience is very much important to us. So we look forward to this new day. I think this is a great start that Brian's team has done, or this team here at the Office of the Engineer has done. So this chapter, what you're going to hear, is really just hits the high points. We didn't go through every single change. You can see those for yourself. You can see the red lines. You can see the change. You can read the executive summary. So this just really just hits the high points. And there's still numerous issues. There's still numerous other things out there that need to be addressed in the manual. And so this is just a step to assist with making it better. At the Q&A session, those of you that can't see the back behind the scenes, but we are collecting those comments, and then they will feed them to me at the end. So please feel free to when you get one pops in your head, go ahead and do the chat. Go ahead and send us that comment, that question, and we'll be sure to get it addressed. We can't interact, obviously, in this format, but we'll do the best job we can. And then at the end, and I'll probably say this again at the end, we'll be collecting all these comments. We'll try to we can then come up with a more clearer answer than we can provide online here, and post that with the presentation. So to kind of go over some of the organizational changes, you'll notice in the manual that we've made some organizational changes. The first one I went over, I just talked about, was the combining of Chapter 9 and 13, again for clarity. But that new Chapter 9 is divided into the stormwater management component, which will be basically sections 1 through 7, and then sections 8 through 11 concentrate on the stormwater quality design. Then we've added a table of contents. At the beginning of this chapter, that's what I found relatively odd the whole time I've been associated with the IDM, is that there isn't a way to quickly get to one of these sections. You have to start flipping, or if you've done it 100,000 times, you know exactly what paragraph you're looking for, 9 point something, 9 something, so you can go straight to it. So we've added a table of contents. This table of contents in the future will hopefully will help us to do, of course, easier navigation. Once we go to a fully electronic document, can help with hyperlinking, so you can find a section relatively rapidly in the new section rather than doing word searches, which maybe will work just as well as also. But we felt that adding table contents to Chapter 9. So Chapter 9 is the only one this has been done on, and as we go through each chapter in the future, it will convert each one of them in due time. So you'll see this slowly but surely change out the manual unless we get really, really industrious and decide to do it all at once. So as you can see, we have the various sections, the stormwater design requirements, the stormwater quality design requirements, the figures that will go with it. And so hopefully this will help you. Another change you'll see, another format change you'll see is the page by page. So each page we've added additional navigation. Those of you that again use it significantly, one particular section of chapter 9, I believe it's 902 H or 902 something H, is something like 6 pages long, 6 or 7 pages long. So if you're in one of those pages, just has merely, it basically is just one paragraph. So if you are looking for that particular and you flip to it and you go, well, what paragraph am I on? And you want to go back to one of the major paragraphs, you kind of have to flip back 4, 5, 6 pages to find that paragraph, the beginning of it, the 902H or something like that. So we've added this navigation capability. So if you're on a page, you want to Xerox a page, you want to send that page to somebody, you want to, whatever you want to do, and you're flipping through it or you're flipping through electronically, and you see that, you know what paragraph you're on. Makes sense. We think it makes sense. So there's additional navigation at the top. So you look at the different formats in the 2018 and the 2019 formats. We've added better definition, more clarity to each one of the pages so that you can navigate them better. And then adding footnotes. Where did this come from? Another part of our journey has been finding out, where did this come from? Finding off the allergies here. So where did this come from? Where did this little nugget of information come from? So we're going to start adding that to the manual. Footnotes, various other types of information, so that it's not just somebody's opinion or somebody's directive. It's industry. It's an industry standard. We sometimes get caught up in, well, it's just one person's opinion. It really shouldn't be just one person's opinion. It shouldn't just be mine or Brian's or someone else's. It should be an industry standard. And so we're looking for, whenever we go through a change or add criteria, is finding out what are we trying to follow? What are we trying to do? So we're going to be adding that, added that information in footnotes or various other ways to the manual. So at a relatively high level, these are basically the highlights. At the beginning of the manual, just real quick, at the beginning of chapter 9, that's why I'm just kind of hit on this just real quick, because we only say at the beginning, is that we are, I'm giving this presentation on chapter 9 and the highlights of the overview of stormwater management, stormwater quality. But there is something looming out there. I'm going to hit on a little later, but I'm going to go ahead and say it right now, is that we are looking at a unified detention criteria with the county. So if that's one of your questions, wait for that. I'll talk about that in a little more detail a little bit later. So speaking of that, the county pretty much concentrates on track size. So track size is important because it should define the criteria that you should follow, not the area that you're impacting. And there's a big distinction between those two items. So we've added some clarity there. We've added a statement in the policy section regarding no adverse impact, even though that's pretty much state law, and our criteria follows that pretty much. We want to make sure that we added a clear statement in the policy that no, you cannot adversely impact a neighbor next door or otherwise. So that's why we have the criteria that we have. And then we've revised some of this. There have been some revisions to the disturbed area definition and impervious surface definition. We felt it important to add the 500-year frequency, since that's one we now move floodplain management to the 500-year, 2+. So we felt we needed to define the 500-year frequency. Also, the new ILS 14 data covers 500-year frequency. And then last item there is clear up the most restrictive criteria issue. So in the policy, that particular paragraph 9102G is the speaks to most restrictive criteria. Now, most restrictive criteria is when you're outfalling to another agency's system, TxDOT, Harris County, City of Houston, someone else. Past practices, there's actually some ambiguity. There was actually a chapter, there was actually a paragraph in G as well that, I think 92G, that, H, that basically stated that you followed the criteria of the agency that you outfalled into. Well, if you're still in the City of Houston, and the City of Houston had a more stricter criteria, then I don't know if that would sit well with anybody having to answer questions regarding why this person had to put detention in and this person didn't. Because not so much the capacity of the receiving, it's basically the capacity of the entire system. And so we've cleared that up. It only now is the most restrictive criteria, and it's in the policy section. This is the policy section. 9102 is policy. And eventually policy will be taken completely out. It will be its own document. It will not be included. It might be in the IDM, but it's going to be at the beginning of the IDM along with all the other policies that we might have, like Brian hit on graphics. We might have a policy that basically states everybody, no matter who, has to submit an electronic file, a drawing file, that kind of thing. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, just this is for instance. And so we would collect all the policies and put them in a policy chapter, so all policy. And then have the criteria for each one in each one of the sections. So this would just cover the criteria. So this was so before I get into the actually individual pieces, this one again, this was a pretty good cross section of participants, and so there was a lot of lengthy discussion on some parts of this. And we tried to capture everybody's. We tried to capture it all in some way, shape, or form. If it was a good idea, we tried to capture it. If it was something we need to postpone, we tabled it. But it should be in the basically the notes or the minutes of the exercise, if you would, so that the community knows that we're aware of the issue. So just keep that in mind as we're going through it. You know, there might be something here to say, wait a minute, you might have been part of the group. Wait a minute, I thought we were going to do this. No idea is being thrown out. No idea is being discounted. We just basically we were limited in our time on this one. We had a very short schedule, so we had to get something out. But Brian hit on errata, we hit on amendments, we hit on various things. We will do that throughout the year when needed. So we're here at this portion where those of you that are out there wondering, okay, what is the city doing with Atlas 14? So we acknowledge that Harris County and the Harris County Public District adopted, well, this slide says will be adopting. This was prepared before the July 9th Commissioner's Court exercise, where Commissioner's Court basically has adopted new criteria for Harris County Public District to follow for detention. So we acknowledge that. We put a statement like that on the cover of the first page of Chapter 9. And the city does intend to somehow align ourselves with Harris County. We participated in various workshops with them during the analysis phase to provide some feedback. They were under a fairly aggressive schedule, so we did do some participation, but we weren't. But we wanted them to move forward, and we agreed with the recommendations. And for the most part, we're basically already on record as indicating that we are moving toward some sort of a basically implementation of some interim policy, interim criteria. That's going to be somewhat along the lines of Harris County, because of the Atlas 14 data. We're not ignoring it. We can't ignore it. We just weren't able to move as fast as Harris County. However, we are intending to move forward as soon as possible with pretty much a study of our own to look at the Atlas 14 data as it applies to urbanized areas, highly urbanized areas like the city of Houston. Harris County's criteria might very well cover urban areas, but the majority of what they deal with is rural or suburban, not as densely populated as we deal with, not having to deal with basically entire huge areas of storm sewers versus open channels. So we are going to be looking at that ourselves. It makes sense, and then we would then be coming up with a final document or a final recommendation after that is done. But in the interim, we want to align ourselves as best we can with the county being 1,700 square miles, the city being a huge area that's 1,700 square miles. It makes sense that we align ourselves with criteria, them, us, them. So we are committed to doing that. So you will see that in future editions, future conversations as we move on. So hopefully that will clear that up. So now let's get into the actual sections and actual requirements. So starting out with the design of storm sewers under section 2A, under the design frequency, we recognize that this basically just reiterating what everyone basically just knows, that we have the 2-year minimum rainfall, and as Atlas 14 gets more into, and we adjust our rainfall intensity curves and our data to align with Atlas 14, you'll see these numbers, you'll see the actual criteria change or the parameters change, but for the most part, you follow the 2-year minimum rainfall event. And then moving on to another part we looked at was pipe sizes and placement, which had to deal with single-family residential point of connection. This is so in the city, we deal an awful lot with redevelopment of single-family residential lots. So that was a big focus of this particular review. One of those items is on a roadside ditch. If figuring out how big of an outfall you should put into a roadside ditch, Transportation Drainage Operations has requested a minimum 12-inch Schedule 40 pipe, so that when their mowers hit it, there'll still be a significant amount of area left for the water to drain out of. So if you do have a yard drain, you basically will have to transition into a 12-inch pipe before it gets into the roadside ditch. 4-inch pipes are still going to be allowed to go through curbs for drainage of single-family residential property of less than 15,000 square feet. So that's still in the manual. There's a minimum horizontal clearance that we are enforcing moving forward, and that's going to be the 4 feet from edge of pipe to edge of pipe. So if you do have a water line, a wastewater line, anything else, Transportation Drainage Operations wants to maintain a minimum 4-foot clearance between those two pieces of those two utilities for maintenance purposes. Depending upon, it doesn't really matter who's over what. So just maintain a 4-foot minimum clearance. And then the minimum vertical clearance, that's had an awful lot of discussion recently, or well, not necessarily recently, the last few years, because a previous city engineer did write a memo. It was unsigned that basically allowed for something less than 1.5 feet. Transportation Drainage Operations wants to maintain, for criteria's sake, 1.5 feet clearance in all cases, no matter what the construction method is used. So moving forward, that's going to be the requirement. You're not going to be allowed to less than that without a variance, of course. And really, quite frankly, we might get less and less agreeable to doing that as a variance as well, because it's just not something very well liked by our operations side. So especially on in-house projects, we're going to have to maintain 1.5 feet. If you're doing retro work, which is a lot of developers have to do retro work, we're just going to work with you as best we can to deal with this 1.5 foot clearance issue. So bear with us on that. There is no longer, do not assume you get 6 inches if you trench it. You need to do your designs to adhere to the 1.5 foot clearance. Then there were a couple other items. Not real sure where they went to. So the couple other items is that we're not going to allow conflict manholes. The conflict manhole, water, wastewater running through a storm sewer system is not allowed. They're not allowed anymore. So you'll have to route, or either route the utility around it or design your storm sewer differently. And so we're not going to allow any more. Definitely no water. Water was eliminated a long time ago, and sanitary should have been eliminated a long time ago. But basically, at the end of the day, if there's any leakage, people say, well, I encase it. Encasing something doesn't make it any better. And something gets into the storm sewer system, then it creates problems. And so a leaking sanitary system creates a problem. A leaking water system creates problems because you can't really see it if it's leaking into a storm sewer system. And clean water is coming out of it. You don't know if it's groundwater or potable water. And so they just want to eliminate the conflict. And then, so there's the utility side, the use of water utility side, but then there's also the maintenance side. But the maintenance folks that have to maintain these storm sewer systems don't want to have to deal with another utility running through their utility. So you need to be mindful of it. I know it's basically a practice, but we're going to slowly but surely eliminate that practice here in the city of Houston for the benefit of maintenance. The second thing is siphons. Siphons are also a major headache for our stormwater maintenance group. The siphons, blockages, get into the system. I mean, basically are created in the system. Some people have offered to do a maintenance agreement. That doesn't really help. If they're blocked at the time of a storm, it didn't help. So we are basically eliminating these two items, siphons and conflict manholes, so that the stormwater maintenance system can be properly maintained. Stormwater quality can properly be maintained, if you would. So be aware of that as you move forward on your designs, so that we don't have issues in the future. So continuing with the design of storm sewers, we did discuss here in house, the folks that do stormwater design wanted to expand on starting water source elevation issue. So chapter 5A on page 913, I believe, of the IDM, basically has been expanded significantly to define the starting water source elevation. So you need to read that section carefully. Now there is new discussion shouldn't be too new, but not sure. I don't think we don't have any discussion, I don't think, on the 2D modeling aspects. And so, but as as that technology takes more better footing, I know some of the future modeling efforts will be in 2D. We will adapt accordingly. So if you have any questions that you have regarding 2D, we'll take those up at a later date. And then we have the standard inlet table has been changed to better define the application where the inlet can be used. This was done to add clarity, basically combine a couple other inlet tables. We had 2 different inlet tables, 2 different reasons. I'm not sure why, but we've combined those now into one. We've added a precast area zone drain, the PAZD inlet. Now this is part of a movement to adopt more of a TxDOT standards. You'll see this in the county too. The county's working on specifications that basically mirror TxDOT. You'll see item 360 or item 4 something. That's because the TxDOT is basically the local expert in concrete placement or pavement placement, it kind of makes sense. And we may very well be moving that direction as well, but in our world, we're a little bit more convoluted because we have water, wastewater, and various other things that we have to do that those two entities don't do a lot of. We might do adjustments of, but they don't maintain those systems. And so we have to, our system will be a blend of those two. So this is one of those things that we're doing, the PAZD, and the manual has the reference drawing and the PDF that you can look at in the TxDOT system, is one of those items. And we've eliminated, it looks basically like a type E. And the H2 inlet has been removed in its entirety. We no longer allow the H2. TDO doesn't like it and don't use it anymore. So then the current redevelopment activity has brought to our attention the proliferation of driveways on existing thoroughfares and collectors. And this activity resulted in numerous driveways being designed where there's an existing inlet. The preferred method of dealing with this conflict was to move the inlet in some way, shape, or form, maybe left to right. But the problem with that is that no longer put the inlet in the low spot. So there's a detail 2632-04 through 05, the new one that actually Jamie will hit on, shows the relocation methods for the BB inlet. So sometimes in the past there was an urge to kind of move that inlet into the travel lane possibly. What this clarification does is the grade inlets are not allowed in travel lanes. Basically states that you cannot put the inlet beyond the gutter. So if you do two grates, you'll have basically a V in the middle. You can see the detail. The V will be in the middle of the grates. So one grate will be on the driveway upslope, and one grate will be in the gutter. And that's going to be, and that's allowed. That adjustment will be allowed wherever it is. And then the city is also allowing, is now only allowing the type C inlet on thoroughfares. So when you're on a thoroughfare, their goal is to try to eliminate as many as possible the grates in the travel lanes and they're entirely gutters. And also you'll see that we basically stated that only type C manholes will be allowed on thoroughfares. So we don't have that grate. That's just a throat with a manhole behind it. And so in the storm sewer specification 2631, there were changes that dealt mainly with flexible pipe. So when you go to 2631, there was a significant discussion on how to deal with this flexible pipe issue, HDPE. We're seeing a proliferation of that now in the especially development world. And so we've added hopefully some clarity to that and what's going to be required if you want to do HDPE or any kind of flexible pipe. So now continuing on with 2A under design of open channels, under design of culverts, the major change, at least for some residents, would be the deletion of a parking pad. So, or deletion of this ability to do a parking pad. So the parking pad option is really a Chapter 42 option and has to deal with new or redevelopment, if you would, or replatting, where a developer wants to get additional parking on the street. There is an ability for them to put a parking pad or get parking on a street. And we're kind of wrestling with that right now and how better to do that, but that'd be the only time a parking pad will be allowed. So we're going to be slowly but surely informing the community that parking pads are not going to be allowed for individual residents. So many of you have clients out there that's an individual resident. That's an individual resident that wants to put a parking pad, they're going to have to, we're going to start rejecting those and dealing with that particular situation. But if you do a parking pad, or you do a culvert, especially that first one, if you're doing a parking pad, the culvert that you place, past practice was they just own a 24-inch pipe. That's not going to be allowed anymore unless that 24-inch pipe accommodates all the storage within that system from one end to the other. So from one end to the other, if you eliminate all the eliminated storage in that system due to that parking pad, will have to then be recaptured in an underground system. So you may have to put in boxes, you may have to put in multiple pipes, you may have to put in some kind of system to accommodate all the storage lost in that system. That was one of our biggest issues with the roadside ditches that's going on right now, and especially all the redevelopment, is the elimination of storage in the system. It's pretty bad. And so we're going to start. This is an attempt to if you're going to develop if you can develop this corridor, then you're going to have to, at the minimum, start restoring lost storage. So this is a requirement in order to do that. You're also going to have to do hydraulic analyses, so we got to be able to move the water through it. So this combination of storage, hydraulic analysis. We may start requiring some sort of hydraulic analysis in all culverts, if you would, because really that's completely missing from our system right now. There's this proliferation of culverts, and we're not capturing anything. And then we want you to, again, in the past, that someone just throwing a culvert and there'd be no attention to the edges. You can't go down a roadway, a highway, without some sort of head wall structure on a highway culvert, some sort of in protection. We need to be taking a somewhat similar approach, but we're going to start with head walls because we don't deal with not dealing with the traffic velocity, if you would, speed of highway traffic, but we're going to start requiring, or have been requiring, head walls. Now, what you're going to note there is we no longer have a standard detail for a head wall. We don't really want to standardize it. Don't know if you need to standardize it. It's a pretty simple design, so the designer will have to design an appropriate structure for the head wall. I think Jamie might touch on that as we move forward when it comes to the deletions. So again, moving forward on 2A, the stormwater detention requirement, the application of detention. So to reiterate, we removed the ambiguity. In this section, we did have something that kind of was in conflict with policy. We basically stated that you could use the rate of the agency that the system outfalled into. We have eliminated that. Now you'll use the strictest criteria. And just to kind of touch on that, until we become aligned with the county, they now have a stricter criteria. So if you back up to a fucking show ditch and you have to provide detention and they tell you it's 0.65, then that's the rate. It's going to be 0.65. They're now stricter than we are, possibly. So as you're doing your design work, you'll have to keep that in mind. And in their system, it's immediate. If you didn't have it in by June 9th, you are now in the new criteria. So we are going to start following that directive. You follow the strictest criteria, no matter where you are in the city. If you're inside the city, you're required to follow that strictest criteria. So please don't come in and say, hey, TxDOT didn't require it. TxDOT, water that falls on any of your city sites, if you're doing city work, or if you're doing development in your clients' sites, it impacts the community. It doesn't just impact your client. So please keep that in mind. So then the calculation of detention volume, the impervious surface is defined in 91040, but pretty much you can read that. And we've deleted paragraphs that were confusing. We would think throughout the manual, we sometimes felt like we had to redefine something, we had to say it again, or we reiterate parts of a definition. We took that out. Just go back and read the definition. We don't need to reiterate the definition. And then there was in our world here at the cities anyway, one of the biggest things we deal with, of course, is in redevelopment is the redevelopment of single-family residential lots, anything going under 15,000 square feet or less. And some of those lots either develop as a house, some of them, single-family residential house, over the entire lot, just expand the area. And then some of them are actually converted replatted, if you would, with a shared driveway. And so we see this a lot in our work here at the city when it comes to private development now. The townhouses, various other things cropping up, 3 or 4 townhouses going on to a lot, then they use a shared driveway. And so we have this discussion with owners and engineers a lot. And so this conversation is just about the detention requirement. There's other issues with that we'll get into is with other chapters, particularly water and wastewater, that impact these developments as well. But this one just focused on the detention rate. So the detention rate is still the same basically for both of them. It's going to be 0.2 for the development, but we're going to change it up a little bit, and we're going to. So if you're dealing with a no shared driveway situation, then it's going to be 0.2 over the area, even if so you split up a lot into 2 or 3. Each one of those be treated as individual lots, because that's what we say. We say single-family residential lots are 15,000 square feet or less. So this is basically the equation that we want you to use. That we 0.2 acre-feet per acre times impervious area that's anything greater than 65% of the lot. So it's pretty straightforward equation. We will allow, and you're not allowed to sheet flow. Not going to be allowed to sheet flow to the roadway, even if you are a single-family residential property. You will have to collect it, and then outfall through. You're going to be allowed to outfall through a 4-inch drain in the curb. Now, shared driveways is what is different. So the equation you see up here is that we are going to require that the shared driveway, the entirety of it, be captured. So the 0.2 will be applied over the entire shared driveway, and then the remainder of the X lot will be calculated at whatever's greater than 65%. So hopefully that will add some clarity to the issue. So when someone comes in, a developer comes in, and they split up the lot into multiple lots, that they know how to address that. They'll still be able to do they'll have to do a collection system within the lot in its entirety. They have to collect everything internally. If there is a storm sewer that runs in front of them, or a ditch deep enough to accept a pipe outfall, then they will be required to outfall appropriately into that system with a 24-inch line. So they'll collect it, subsurface system. They can't do sheet flow. They will have to then outfall into that. Now, if they're in the middle of the lot, storm sewer systems are running down the side streets, and there's 100 feet, 200 feet from them to the closest storm sewer system, we are going to allow a shallow collection system on site, and then outfall with a 4-inch line, as far as I'm concerned. We were having them expend a significant amount of money on their own to get either direction, and that was an awful lot of cost to a single project, and so it just seems relatively draconian to do that. So we are this particular city engineer is going to, at least at this point in time, again, I made the statement at the beginning that anything that I say cannot be held against me. That if that changes in the future, then we'll let everybody know. But as of this writing, that's the approach we're going to take. And then just want to make sure everybody understands there is no sheet flow. We constantly get developments coming in here that want to do sheet flow. And I know at one time sheet flow was allowed, especially even sometimes large developments. But if that's the way the pattern was, but post Harvey, August of 17 changed all that, and you're not allowed to just sheet flow. You'll have to do some sort of subsurface system. So I want to go through just real quick. We decided to, our graphics department is what it is, so this one, this is kind of a quick little example. Now, someone did have a 15,000 square foot lot. They did a shared driveway. That with and without a shared driveway, this is basically the numbers. So you'd be collecting everything on 3,000 square feet, and then you would look at whatever's left. I didn't go through and do the math again, but so hopefully the math works out. But But the purpose, the point of this is that if you do have a shared driveway, you will be detaining in some way, shape, or form, or storing in some way, shape, or form, more water than if you were to do a non-shared driveway. So if these were 4 lots, flag lots, or something like that, that all came out onto the street directly, we would only look at it as the second number without a shared driveway. Because that's what the policy says. It's, if you're on a single-family residential lot of 15,000 square feet or less, you're allowed this. Now, maybe future additions, if people find workarounds on this one and start doing it different ways, maybe as we go through the Atlas 14 data, as we go through this urbanization review, maybe this will change. Maybe we'll come up with something better, some better way of doing it. But as of right now, this is the way we're currently leaning. So if you do have clients some of you may have clients that do this, that redevelop single-family residential lots, we are trying to capture it better and let you all know exactly how to deal with this particular situation. So if you give us some feedback, if you have any comments on that. So, and just real quick on that past one, we did have, past practices were to lump this in with commercial. We call it a commercial application. Hopefully we'll eliminate that from a vernacular. This isn't commercial, even though, no matter how closely related it is, we're going to try to eliminate that from our vernacular. So then moving on with stormwater detention and calculation of detention volume. So dealing with this track size issue. So at the beginning of the presentation, I kind of touched on track size and use of track size. It's a relatively universal that most designers now know what a track size is, but the use of the area to define the detention rate, the use of that area to define the detention rate was confusing. So what they're supposed to do, so the track size will define the rate that you will use, whatever that is. Currently it's 0.2 and 0.5. In the future, it's probably going to be some other set of numbers. The track size, so if you're working in a 1 acre tract, a 5 acre tract, and you're developing 1 acre of it, you're only disturbing 1 acre, and you're going to put something in the corner, and you're going to do something else. The track size will define the rate, not the area you're working in. So so you're working on 5 acres, and you're oh wait a minute, I'm only going to do 0.9 acres at this time. The track size will define the rate. So you'll be at the 0.5 versus 0.2 right now. And maybe someday we'll just have one rate and it won't matter. But right now, track size, as of July 1, the track size will define the rate that you'll use, and then you will then multiply that rate by the actual area that you're impacting. That will be all that you're required to attain at that time. Will be the area that you are impacting. Then low impact development. We kind of touched on that. We kind of expanded a little bit. There is a move to add or better capture, deal with low impact development, green infrastructure, add it to our system, expand detention options. We're adding. So if you add detention options using low impact development, might be a good thing, right? So we are adding that to our repertoire. You're just going to have to, if you use low impact development, use green infrastructure, that's going to kick you into the stormwater quality side, where you'll need to provide us with some sort of a permit. We'll ask that it be permitted so that we can verify that it's there year after year after year after year, versus some sort of open system that is storing water. So the city, and then also will be, the county has low impact development. That'll be one of those things we want to align with, that the county has or has adopted some sort of low impact development or some sort of ability to incorporate low impact development to the detention requirement. Maybe the city can do the same. So kind of stay tuned on that. So then, continuing on with the outlet size, the reducer or the restrictor pipe sizing. we had one way of calculating the alpha, the restrictor. We didn't have rectangular weir calculation, because we see a little bit of that, especially on the second stage. So we've added this particular formula just for your benefit. I think it's industry known, but as a criteria manual, felt compelled to add it in our particular manual as well. And so then if you flip all the way, get past the criteria and you get into the exhibits and figures, figure 9.4 is an example, is a sample, if you would, of the calculations for those of you that maybe new at it or need a little bit of help with that. Well, it's out there for you. So I'll quickly find out where we are supposed to be in our presentation. I think we are on, what's that? Yeah, we're a ways down there. So we'll quickly run through it until I can find chapter 9, section 2B. We have time to kill anyway, right? So anyway, sorry about that. So again, we're on section 2B. Again, we had a lot of discussion regarding the design features, and we had some people that wanted, or some participants wanted us to get into the details of design within the manual and start requiring certain design calculations. So we basically just backed off, in order to satisfy that part of the community that was asking for that, as well as not required, because that's what some of the suppliers didn't want us to do. We came up with this phrase that we just added under section 2B, which is the engineer of record is responsible for the design. And that pretty much goes without saying. And even though we're eliminating cast in place as one of the items that in our standard details, the engineer is still able to provide a design for cast in place or some other, especially in the world of retrofitting, when in the middle of something and you have to design around a lot of different things. There may be some other kind, there may be a requirement that cast in place cannot be used, but for the most part, new designs, our in-house projects can probably utilize cast in place. And so precast. So we allowed, and there is always that ability for an engineer to provide us a design. So under the submittal for review and comment, we cleaned this up too. The section we had two, preliminary and final. We have now combined those into a singular submittal and added clarity. We've eliminated ambiguities, we eliminated duplications. We've done some streamlining of the document. So hopefully this will make it easier. So no matter what your submittal, just make sure that you follow the submittal requirements and they'll be consistent every single time. So no matter where you are in the design process, you need to follow that particular submittal requirement. So then moving on into the stormwater quality section, or part of Chapter 9, pretty much the only thing we added, one of the main items we added in this particular section was the engineered soil media. And there's a concern, there's always been a concern by the city, and that's one of our issues with lead, and one of our issues with some of these green initiatives is how do you maintain that be able to still work. And so we want to make sure, so we added this about engineered soil media, this phrase, and one of the keys in that is making sure we don't over compact it. We're okay with moving to this direction, but you pretty much need to maintain, as you're constructing, this is more of a construction issue. We're okay with it, I think, we believe, in a lot of applications, but we are going to have to be more cognizant of this as we're constructing these items so that they do properly work when needed. And then we've kind of relaxed, not relaxed, but made it simpler for tracts less than an acre when they're doing their stormwater quality and their stormwater pollution prevention, that we do have a single sheet or single drawing that can be added for those small sites. So so on low impact development, continuing on this subject and the porous paver, we did have a significant conversation about this I'm not real sure where to begin, but we did have a significant conversation about porous pavers and porous pavement. Everyone knows the application on the Beltway that they did, the little test. So we listened, there's a lot of, we added a lot and then we deleted a lot, going back and forth. So that this whole desire to use porous pavement, porous pavers, was discussed a lot. I don't know why we discussed it so long, but we did. And so this is the result of that relatively lengthy conversation. So it is now restricted to, you can use in both single family and commercial applications, but you're probably going to have to submit a stormwater quality permit for a stormwater quality permit if you want to use it, because we need to make sure it is being properly maintained, and our stormwater quality permit allows that to happen. We'll inspect it every year. The client will pay an annual fee in order for that to be considered anything. So you can use it for detention. There may be a detention application, but we're actually going to focus on the stormwater quality component of it. And so we've expanded it, whereas before there wasn't a commercial application, you used porous paver, porous pavement, because we were really concerned about the maintenance of this facility, maintenance of this item, that a future commercial owner could pave over it or seal over it or something like that over time, rather than properly maintaining it. So we've relaxed. Let's just put it into the stormwater quality permit world, so we'll maintain it that way. So bear with us. So now with a computer glitch, we're now at an hour, which is about what I had estimated that we'd be done in. So what I want you, so it pretty much covers all the major changes that we made to the chapter. And we understand that there's going to be constant questions from the community regarding the criteria. That's why I mentioned at the beginning that there's still ways to get your voice heard. There's our hope that we've kind of cleared up most of the issues, but there's still those lingering issues out there. And I know there will always be more. So, okay. Go ahead, finish that. I've got it. And so we're always open to suggestions and comments. And if any of you have questions, I hope that you'll forward those questions to us as soon as possible. So right now we're collecting questions. So I'm going to talk for a few more minutes, give you time to formulate a question if that's what you want to do. Send it in. This is one opportunity to ask questions, but you can ask questions anytime in the future as well. You can send me notes. You can send the Standards and Specifications Committee notes that you have. We are constantly going to collect them. We are going to stick to a standard schedule or regular schedule. So 5 years from now, Chapter 9 will come up again, most definitely. But just because we're on a schedule doesn't mean we're restricted to that schedule. So you're allowed to submit questions anytime over the next 5 years. And if it's something big enough for us to make a change, we'll make a change mid-year or even every single year an IDM comes out. So submit your questions now through the chat feature. There's staff collecting those questions right now, and I'll be provided those questions as you submit them, and I'll do the best I can to answer those questions. But this entire webinar, of course, is being recorded and we posted it later. We'll edit out the delay. And if I'm unable to answer a question here, or if we pass on a question for whatever reason, we'll run out of time, we'll post all the questions and an appropriate answer with recording. So I appreciate you listening. So we'll go through the few questions that we've already collected. So one of the questions I did see come across was concrete encasing another utility if it's less than 1.5 feet. That's really not what this is about. Actually, concrete encasing, I don't know if that makes it any better, because we're talking about the ability of maintaining the storm sewer system. And so someone encasing the utility doesn't make it any better. They still have to be able to maintain the facilities. If they have to take out the facility, they want the clearance to be able to do it. So if you're closer than that, probably the concrete probably just makes it worse. And so I don't think that concrete encasing makes it any better. So the minimum size of storm sewer pipe from the roadways is still 24 inches. We don't allow anything less than that. We are probably going to be, since someone brought this up, probably are going to be eliminating the ability to put HDPE under any roadway. In the future, there is, in the specification, there is still that allowance. I think we're going to be eliminating that allowance. And then there was a question regarding sheet flow into the right-of-way. This has to do with all tracks that fall into a detention requirement will have to put in a subsurface drainage system. How big and small that is might be as little as small as 4-inch pipe on a small residential site, or it might be something else. But you're required to provide that detention up to the ability of the water to overflow into a road right-of-way. We understand under extreme events, the extreme event is going to go into the road right-of-way once the underground system is surcharged. We're not trying to collect this. This isn't retention. We're not trying to collect everything on a site and make it stay there. We understand that when the system is surcharged, it will go into a sheet flow mode. So you have to be able to get you have to direct it to the driveway or to the front in some way, shape, or form, so you do not, in that scenario, drain onto your neighbor, or at least give the water all the opportunity in the world to get to a public right-of-way before everything goes underwater, and then we can't control that situation. So that just really has to do with the early rainfall, if you would, on a site. So then, will the stormwater quality permit be required for CIP projects, or will this be granted with an overall OC approval? The water quality, when we're doing our own projects, we'll address the water quality requirements. If there is that's going to be more of a departmental answer than an OCE answer. We do have a nationwide permit that we are required to follow. If that applies to our own in-house projects, then we'll apply that accordingly. So I really don't know at this time if there's going to be any kind of requirement or not, but we'll address that in more detail as the projects come up. So I planned for half an hour because I didn't know what kind of questions might come up when it came to this particular topic. We do get an awful lot of input from the community, regarding Chapter 9 our day-to-day lives. And so I would expect there to be significant questions from the community regarding this, but if they're not, I'm okay with that as well. Let me just real quick on my own kind of read through some of the questions that have come up. So we have, for subsurface infrastructure repairs and replacement in parking lots, we basically have remove the concrete pavement to access these infrastructure elements. So do we need to provide? So that there is a maintenance component that we have also tried to wrestle with. That's one of those things that, again, we tried the best job we can to hit on all the elements, but if you are performing maintenance on a site, one of the classic ones is a gas station. And you have to remove pavement, you have to get to the tank, perform maintenance on the tank, replace the tank, and then replace the asphalt and replace the concrete or whatever was on top of it. We recognize that as a maintenance activity. You're pretty much not changing anything. There is not a detention requirement for that. So if you have clients that do that kind of work or any kind of maintenance like that, where you have to remove something on the surface to get to a subsurface item, and then you're just basically repairing it, that's not what this is. The redevelopment requirement, the requirement to add detention to redevelopment is just that. If you're removing pavement to turn it into something else, you're removing pavement, large parking lot to put in structures, and so you're restructuring it, redeveloping it. That's where that comes into play. Not somebody doing normal maintenance to a subsurface feature. If we are doing equipment replacement and non-substantial improvements to an existing site, what requires that? In the stormwater quality, the stormwater world, there isn't a non-substantial component. We have substantial, non-substantial in the floodplain management world that triggers something. But in the stormwater world, we currently do not have any minimums and maximums. We don't have that. Maybe future manuals will, maybe future, once we get this urbanized review underway and done, maybe we'll have a minimum, but we don't have a minimum right now. So there's no such thing as substantial, non-substantial improvements to a site. If you alter 500 square feet, then you pretty much have to detain for 500 square feet if it hadn't already been addressed. If you're doing 200 feet, 100 feet, whether it makes sense or not is kind of irrelevant at this point. That's what the criteria says, and so we are going to be addressing that in the future. We didn't have time to address it with this release because it was so soon after the September 1st release of last year. But that's a good question, and we do run across it, and there are conversations here to deal with that. But right now, we really do not have a way to deal with it. So another question is, will the city still allow drainage collection system from the back lot to the roadway via junction box? So, or we see the PVC pipe in the curb. So you can still, if you are a residential property, and this is only going to be residential, commercial not going to be allowed to do this. Commercial is going to have to locate a storm sewer system or put one in. They're not going to be allowed to just sheet flow to the street or put in a shallow system through the curb. This option is really just for the single family residential lot. So you will have to, all future developments are going to have to do some collecting of the water, depending upon their use. Single family or commercial will define just how deep they'll have to go. And then if we are not increasing any existing impervious cover, do we need to provide detention? Again, this isn't about increasing. Now, crudely, I kind of put this, killed off grandfather last year. In our redevelopment, our criteria basically deals with even if it's all concrete now, if you come in and alter any part of that, you'll be required to provide detention for that alterated portion of the tract. So if you have 1 acre and you're coming in and altering half of that, the other half isn't changing at all, you're not doing anything changes it at all, then you'll be required to detain for half that tract. That's just the way the new rules are. It's part of the redevelopment effort that went into effect last year. So everybody has to adhere to that. So with that, I pretty much have used up all my time and talked myself out. So Jamie, we might pause for a few minutes while Jamie gets ready, but I appreciate everyone's time. and Brian will come back on with a few items, and then we'll complete the presentation. Thank you.
Chapter 9 and 13 were pretty extensive to go through this year. With it, as many of you know, what some of the controlling factors are drainage and traffic that kind of control a lot of significant items throughout the city. I do want to touch on, some of the technical difficulties we had. We did have a network outage in the middle of this throughout this building, and that affected some of Bob Lemire as well. Murphy's Law, so I appreciate those who have stuck with us. The city engineer does not have jurisdiction over Murphy's Law, so that seems to have trumped us. I do want to touch on a couple things as we go through this in an overall general aspect. I think it again, Joe spoke to at the beginning, coordination, and I think it's important to reiterate the amount of coordination that goes into the government, the changes that Joe has talked about, the Chapter 3, the specifications. We get a lot of various requests through a lot of different mechanisms. And depending on where you are, your vantage point, whether it be in an operations or a group internal, or a designer, a contractor, plan runner, architect, external, sometimes it's hard to see the amount of coordination that is needed for standard drawing, specification, design manual. But we have, again, to kind of reiterate the important component to this, we have and will be continuing to establish the coordination. Joe Zapata at the county came over. We had a lengthy conversation about a month and a half ago about the challenges the county faces with their specifications, and joining in a partnership to tackle specifications and unit price items and bid items, and how that's approached unilaterally between the two of us. We have reached out to the airport and to general services and to establish that coordination piece, because what we build, our specifications, our drawings, our standard drawings, our design criteria affect a lot of people that may not be recognized from perhaps your vantage point or other vantage points, and certainly opened my eyes coming over to the city engineer's office to see the huge scope and interaction that should be and will be moving forward coordinating. We do hear a number of PMs reaching out about the table of contents, and Jamie's going to talk about the specifications and how the 700 speaks to what specification you should be using. Cheryl Harris and I have talked. We're talking with legal. We're actively pursuing updating the table of contents and making sure that again, speaking to the coordination that you might not see, but that is going on, to make sure that your concerns are addressed and make sure this stuff is implemented. If we have questions, shoot an email. Let's talk about that. Also, reaching out. Metro, we have active conversations now going on with Metro, and making sure that their standards are implemented within operations or capital projects or private development that are touching our sidewalks and touching our right-of-way, and how to make sure that word gets out to everybody. So establishing that coordination, and again, using the website and using webinars and using e-blast system to get the message out. So it's not relying so much on word of mouth or individuals, but a collaborative effort that's going on. We are establishing, and I have established it across the country, and we'll continue to sort of do this with Austin Water, the city of LA, and talk about how they're approaching their standard drawings and their specification. As well as SAWS or TxDOT division in Austin, and working with some of their processes and making sure we jive. David Beam with HCA will push for a citywide specification for everything that's built in the city, where that's a lofty goal, but if we work together in tandem, then I think that's achievable in some form or fashion. I also want to speak to the vetting of ideas, internal or external. It's very difficult for us to handle. We appreciate all the comments and stuff, and please do send them, but we do have mechanisms that you can vet, whether you're a PM on the operations side or in capital projects. If you are a contractor, if you are an engineer, we are working heavily with ACEC, HCA, and having that vetted through whatever organization you're in making sure everybody there agrees before it's sent over, goes a long way. To getting that implemented, rather than passing somebody in the street or passing somebody in an elevator going, oh, by the way, I've seen this issue, I've seen that issue. And we're seeing, to a lot of credit out there, to a lot of the organizations out there, that this is happening, and a promise that we're making is that we will act on it. But the further along these come developed and hashed out to us, the more opportunity we have to actually getting that executed and correcting whatever problem that is. Joe did speak to the variance process. If you do go to the city engineer's website, talking about variances throughout projects done for the city, there are two forms there. There's a privately funded and publicly funded form that if you have to vary from the IDM, that's the mechanism that you use for a variance. It speaks to general public safety. You have to have reasons for why you're varying. We take that, we vet that either through operations or look at it from various aspects. Again, those forms can be updated. They're the mechanism that's out there to be used. So use them and suggest updates. You do have to give enough information to the reviewer for us to actually see what the problem is. A lot of times we get 2 or 3 statements on it, we can't really do a whole lot. So if you look at it from that angle, I think you'll also see that supplying enough information will be helpful. Then getting the city engineer to sign off on that, so that when you do come in for plan review, or you do get down the road in the review process or the design process, it's not a decision that's made in a conference room somewhere and then somebody's changed their mind on either side of the aisle. It's something that's firmly documented, vetted, and you can there is no sort of at-risk design area in your design, so you eliminate that. So that's the process that we're trying to hone in on, and it also helps us point out, well, if we have a number of variances in an IDM, maybe that's not a variance anymore. Maybe that does need to become a change to the IDM. So just a couple of those items out there, and kind of to speak maybe a little bit internally when the CAD files, back to chapter 3, and CAD files do come in, and the questions being, what do we do with these CAD files? How do we send these? Who do we send these to? Push those to operations. If it's an MNRS, find the associated GIS person for those items, and they will in turn, we will push the process and the conversation forward on how to capture what we need to capture as far as the city goes. So again, just a couple items to address and to talk about. And again, I thank you all for hanging on. For those of you who had, looks like we kept most of our attendees.